When I threw myself in front of the Empress Dowager and took that blade for her, she asked me what reward I wanted. At that moment, the entire Dingbei Marquis household moved in unison to shield the fake daughter, glaring at me as if I were their enemy. In my previous life, I couldn't wait to expose the wet nurse's secret of swapping babies and reunite with them. But that led to the fake daughter, whom they had cherished for 18 years, being cast out and killed by bandits. They resented me and treated me coldly for the rest of my life. Even later, when I suffered at my husband's family and wrote to them for help, they only replied with 4 words, "You brought this on yourself." Then they watched as I was sold to the border by my husband's family, where I died in a foreign land. Now that I've been reborn, I don't want to repeat those mistakes. I raised my head to meet the Empress Dowager's compassionate gaze, then slowly bowed and said softly, "I've lived a lonely life with no family to rely on. I wish to have loved ones who care for me, like ordinary people do. Please, Your Majesty, find me a suitable family and take me in as your daughter or sister." 01. Child, daughters your age in ordinary families are still clinging to their parents, acting spoiled. But just now, in such a dangerous moment, how did you manage to rush over and shield me without flinching? Her voice was full of tenderness. The Empress Dowager gently touched my cheek with her slightly thin hands. I looked up and clearly saw her eyes brimming with concern and pity, almost overflowing. I couldn't help but feel a sting in my nose, and my eyes welled up. It had been so long since anyone looked at me like that or spoke to me in such a tone. I rubbed my cheek against her palm, savoring the warmth, and whispered, "Your Majesty." She immediately responded with a cheerful, and said softly, "Child, tell me, what do you want?" "As long as it's within my power, I'll try my best to grant it." Before I could even answer, the Dingbei household, who had been silently waiting nearby, suddenly spoke up in unison, "Your Majesty, you must not." At that moment, my heart clenched. I turned around and, as expected, saw the 3 members of the Dingbei family staring at me with deep hatred in their eyes. Clearly, they had been reborn too, just like me, back to the day I took that blade for the Empress Dowager. In my previous life, when I heard the Empress Dowager was going to reward me, I was overjoyed and forcefully exposed the truth about the wet nurse swapping the babies. I even arrogantly kicked the fake daughter out of the house, which led to her dying at the hands of bandits on her way back to her ancestral home. Because of that, they hated me for the rest of my life. So much so that when I was beaten by my husband's family and wrote tearful letters asking for their help, all I got was a cold response, "You brought this on yourself." Maybe it was wrong from the very start. I shouldn't have forced this family reunion on them. 02. I was lost in my past life memories when the Empress Dowager grew angry at the Dingbei family's sudden audacity. She slammed her hand on the table and scolded, "How dare you!" At her words, the Dingbei household all knelt down in fear. The Dingbei Marchioness said, trembling, "Please calm down, Your Majesty. I just thought that this girl's act of saving you was her duty, and she shouldn't expect any reward. She's just a nobody. Giving her some money and sending her away should be enough. There's no need for Your Majesty to make such a promise." Her words were clearly meant to shut down any chance of me reconnecting with my birth family. It seemed that in this life, she wanted nothing to do with me. I lowered my eyes to hide my disappointment, a bitter smile tugging at my lips. Very well, I would do as she wished. Consider it repayment for giving birth to me. But the Empress Dowager was enraged by her speech. "Nonsense," she said. "Everyone in this world is born of a father and mother. If this child gets hurt, her parents should be worried too." At that, the Marchioness, who had been so confident just a moment before, suddenly fell silent and instinctively turned to look at me. But she saw me with my head lowered, my demeanor calm and subdued, which inexplicably made her heart ache. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but the Empress Dowager spoke first. Then she turned to me and said gently, "Child, speak boldly if there's anything you want. I'll back you up." I lifted my eyes to meet her kind gaze, and the shadows over my heart lightened a little. Pulling my hand free from her grip, I bowed low and said solemnly, "Your Majesty, I have no desires or demands. There's only one thing I've wished for all these years, and I hope you can help me with it." The Empress Dowager's expression softened, and she gave a slight nod. "Speak." Seeing this, the Marquis heir grew truly frantic. Ignoring all decorum, he stood abruptly and snapped, "Sun Yen, you're just a commoner. If you'd bled out shielding Her Majesty, that would have been your honor. I advise you not to push your luck with unreasonable demands. You might not be able to handle the consequences." By the end, he dropped all pretense and was openly threatening me. This was my own brother, born of the same mother, looking at me with more hatred than he'd show an enemy. I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh, gripping my skirts as I prepared to fire back. Suddenly, a tall figure swept aside the tent flap and strode in, his voice hearty and commanding. "Then I'd like to hear what request Miss Su could possibly make that would have consequences too severe to bear." At his words, everyone in the tent except the Empress Dowager went pale and dropped to their knees in a flurry, crying in unison, "Long live the Emperor! 10,000 years!" I froze, then quickly turned around. I was about to kneel in obeisance when he reached out and caught my arm, saying gently, "Miss Su, no need for formalities. You saved my mother, and I'm in your debt. From now on, you never have to kneel before me." Then his gaze fell to my bandaged arm, and his eyes darkened slightly. "I'll send some scar-removing ointment to your tent later. A girl shouldn't have to bear scars." His words made me want to cry. First the Empress Dowager defends me, and now the Emperor shows me such consideration. They are the sovereigns, and I am but a subject. As the Dingbei family said, even dying for them would be my good fortune. But they set aside rank and status to show me the most sincere care. Meanwhile, my own blood relatives wish I were dead. I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat, fighting back tears, and whispered my thanks under his warm, deep gaze. "I thank your Majesty for his grace." "No need to thank me. You deserve it." He released my arm and straightened, casting a stern look over the Dingbei family. "But I'd like to ask, what exactly are the Marquis, his wife, and his heir thinking, repeatedly obstructing the Empress Dowager's decisions? Or do you think the Dingbei estate's power is so great that it can dictate to the imperial family?" At this, the Marquis could no longer stay out of it. He bowed deeply and said, "Your Majesty, forgive us. My wife and son would never dream of such a thing. I am utterly loyal to you, and I beg you to see the truth." The Emperor gave a cold laugh. "See that it stays that way." He turned and took a seat beside the Empress Dowager, picking up the earlier thread. "Miss Su, please go on. What matter do you need my mother to settle for you?" Now that even the Emperor had spoken, the Dingbei family knew there was no chance left to turn the tide. Every eye fixed on me burned with bitter hatred. I kept my gaze lowered, taking in their united front. In my past life, at this very moment, I'd been overjoyed at the prospect of being reunited with my birth parents. I completely missed the hatred and wariness in their eyes. There wasn't a shred of joy. I thought blood was thicker than water, that once the truth came out, they'd treat me the way they treated Su Mingwei. But in the end, it was all just a one-woman show of my own making. Miss Su. Seeing me silent for so long, the eunuch chief attendant, who was bowed at the Emperor's side, couldn't help but urge me in a low voice. I snapped back to reality, took a deep breath, bowed deeply again, and said, Your Majesty, Empress Dowager, I've been alone and orphaned since childhood. I've never known the warmth of family. I don't seek gold, silver, or riches. I only wish for a stable home. I beg Your Majesty and the Empress Dowager to grant me a family that would accept me as a daughter or a sister. When I finished, the tent fell utterly silent. The Empress Dowager looked startled. That's all? I replied, yes. She furrowed her brow slightly, glanced at the Emperor, and asked solemnly, Emperor, what do you think? The Emperor lowered his gaze, idly toying with the prayer beads in his hand. After a moment's thought, he said, Miss Sue's request is humble. Mother, why not adopt her as your goddaughter? You'd be her mother, and I'd be her elder brother. That would fulfill her wish. Hearing this, the Empress Dowager beamed. Emperor, you read my mind. I've taken a liking to this child, Nian. Since she seeks family, I'll be her family. She turned her gaze to me. Her phoenix eyes, usually serene, now held a genuine tenderness and solemnity. The Emperor nodded and asked, Sun Yen, are you willing? My throat tightened, and my eyes reddened. I had only asked for a place to belong, and now I was being lifted to the heavens. Above me, the Empress Dowager and the Emperor looked at me with warm, gentle eyes, waiting for my final answer. I bowed deeply, my voice trembling with barely contained emotion. I thank the Empress Dowager for her grace, and Your Majesty for his grace. The Empress Dowager teased, still being so formal. My lips parted, and I hesitantly called out, Mother. Brother. Yes. The Empress Dowager answered joyfully. She personally helped me rise, caressed my face with affection, and said, Good child, from now on, you have a mother and a brother. You're no longer alone. I smiled through my tears, overwhelmed, and nodded with a choked sob. The Emperor watched this scene with satisfaction and said, May Nian have good fortune and auspiciousness. Your title as princess shall be Lingen. We'll hold the formal investiture after the hunt. Lingen, for now, keep the Empress Dowager company on my behalf. Zhang Dequan, the Emperor's chief eunuch, was a shrewd man. He immediately bowed and said, This servant greets Princess Lingen. Congratulations, Princess. With Zhang Dequan taking the lead, the other maids and eunuchs in the tent didn't hesitate. They knelt in unison and cheered, We pay our respects to Princess Lingen. Long live the princess. Everyone except the Dingbei Marquis family. They seemed frozen in shock, not expecting things to take this turn. Finally, the Empress Dowager waved her hand wearily. All right, I'm tired. You may all withdraw. I had come to the hunt as a distant relative of the Dingbei Marquis household, sharing a tent with their servants. Now, having suddenly become Princess Lingen, the Empress Dowager's goddaughter and the Emperor's sworn sister, my status was incomparable, and I naturally needed a more dignified place. Zhang Dequan, on the Emperor's orders, accompanied me to pack my belongings from my old quarters. But I had so few things, just a few changes of clothes, all hand-me-downs that Su Mingwei had cast off and thrown at me. It reminded me of when the Marquis family had first found me. Back then, I was overjoyed, looking forward to reuniting with my family. But when my carriage finally pulled up to the Marquis' estate, I was greeted by a firmly shut gate. The steward led me in through a side door, weaving through a maze of corridors, silently slipping me into the inner courtyard. I performed the proper greetings, still dazed and confused. She sat in the seat of honor, her brow furrowed with disgust as she said sharply, I knew it. You grew up in the countryside for over a decade, so you must be rough and uncultured, unfit to appear in polite society. So, to keep you from tarnishing the family's reputation, I had the steward bring you in quietly. From today on, you'll live here as a distant relative. When the time is right, we'll find you a decent, honest servant boy to marry." I blinked blankly, taking a long moment to process her words. She wasn't going to acknowledge me as her daughter. But if she didn't want to claim me, why bring me back at all? The answer from the Marchioness was this: Mingwei was already betrothed to the heir of the Zhenghua Duke's mansion. They feared outsiders might discover the truth and make a fuss, so they acted first. Mingwei, Mingwei, the pearl in their palm. Their devotion to her was obvious. So devoted that they could sacrifice their own flesh and blood for her future without hesitation. The seed of jealousy was planted right then. It grew until I hated Su Mingwei with a burning madness, driving her to her death and trapping myself in that hatred forever. Zhang Dequan seemed to sense my melancholy and offered comfort. "Princess, don't dwell on the past and make yourself sad. Now you have the Empress Dowager and His Majesty as your closest family. They'll bring you the best the world has to offer." I snapped back to the present, letting out a low, muffled of acknowledgement. In the end, I put the old clothes back where they were and said softly, "Let's go." Since I had new family now, there was no need to cling to old things. But when I stepped out of the tent, I saw an unexpected person, Su Mingwei. This was my first time seeing her since I was reborn. She stood not far from the entrance. Sunlight spilled over her embroidered, gold-threaded gown, making her look like a delicately enshrined jade figurine. 2 personal maids followed her, one holding a parasol, the other a hand warmer. She was putting on quite the show. When she saw me emerge, she broke into a smile and lifted her skirts to approach. "Nian Nian," she called out, then paused, as if a thought struck her. Her pretty face took on a wounded look. "Do I have to address you as Princess Lingyan from now on?" As if she didn't already know the answer. I said nothing. I just stared at her, unwavering. In my past life, I despised her with every fiber of my being. She had stolen everything that should have been mine, yet she always played the victim. All she had to do was cry, and everyone would flock to her with sympathy. So I schemed to expose the truth and had her thrown out of the house. I don't regret going too far in my past life, driving her to an untimely death. It was just retribution. Cause and effect. I pulled myself back to the present and gave a light smile. "You'll not only address me as princess, but you'll also have to bow in deference." At that, Su Mingwei's face twisted in embarrassment, and tears fell. She hadn't expected me to show her no mercy, shaming her in public. "Nian Nian." Her voice softened. "I know you're holding a grudge, but during your time at the manor, I treated you well, didn't I?" Meaning I had no reason to make things hard for her. I calmly watched her tearful eyes, and found it almost funny. Treated me well. What was she referring to? The old clothes she generously handed down to me? Or when the servants gossiped that I was a poor relative mooching off the family, she'd step in with her self-proclaimed kindness, then brush it off with a flippant, "Nian Nian, don't let their words get to you. After all, you really did come from the countryside. It's only natural they're not used to you yet. Once you've lived here a while and learned some manners, they'll stop. Speaking ill of your master was punishable. But she, occupying the identity that should have been mine, watched me get humiliated again and again. Now, I repeated her words back to her, word for word. No wonder you're the daughter of a country peasant. Even after being the young lady of the Dingbei Marquis' household for over a decade, you can't shake that petty, small-minded nature. At this point, Su Mingwei had no room to make excuses. She slowly bent her knees, as if wading through mud, each movement steeped in bitterness and pain. This humble one pays respects to Princess Lingyan. Her voice was as light as willow fluff in the wind. Since I didn't tell her to rise, she had to stay in that half-crouch. Su Mingwei had never endured such torment. Her legs trembled like weak willows in the wind, but she dared not move an inch. Just then, rapid footsteps approached, followed by the Dingbei Marchioness's worried cry, "Mingwei!" As soon as she saw the Marchioness and the heir, Su Mingwei found her pillar of support. Tears streamed down her face as she cried out pitifully, "Mother! Brother! My poor child! You've suffered." The Marchioness immediately stepped forward, hugging her tightly with heartache. In the past life, they were separated by death. In this one, she was restored to her. No wonder she treasured her all the more. Shen Zhao, the heir of the Dingbei Marquis, was furious. He lashed out at me. "Sun Yan, don't think just because you're a princess now, you can do whatever you want. If you ever dare to harm Mingwei again, I'll, even if it kills me, make you shower." The Marchioness cut him off with a cold shout. My status had changed. If he tried to bully me with the old household rules, it would only bring disaster upon themselves. Shen Zhao realized this too. He took a deep breath and swallowed his harsh words, though clearly unwilling. The Marchioness turned to me, her gaze complex. She took a deep breath and lowered her posture slightly. "Princess, may I have a word with you in private?" I curled my lips in disdain. "Madam, we've never had anything to say to each other. How can we have a private word?" In the past life, after hearing of Su Mingwei's death, I was overwhelmed with guilt. I wanted to explain that it wasn't my intention, but she coldly refused me. "I have nothing to say to you. Now that Mingwei is dead, the faint bond between us as mother and daughter is gone. Later, when I suffered in my husband's household, I often wished she would appear to protect me just as she protected Su Mingwei today. But she never did. Not once. Now that I've been reborn, I no longer hold any expectations for her." The Empress Dowager's tent was set on the highest hill north of the hunting grounds. The furnishings inside were simple, but every detail exuded royal grandeur. I was arranged in a small tent beside the main one. Though called small, it was several times more spacious than where I'd stayed before. The floor was covered with thick felt rugs, and the finest silver charcoal burned in the brazier, filling the tent with warmth. Maids filed in, carrying hot water, towels, and clean clothes, helping me wash and dress anew. The matron sent by the Empress Dowager said playfully, "Her Majesty has ordered that the princess be dressed to dazzle, so the noble ladies can see for themselves and she can show off her newly acquired daughter." Every word showed how much the Empress Dowager cherished and valued me. My mind drifted back to the past. Back then, when I suddenly learned I had a mother, I sat anxiously before the mirror, dressing up, pulling out the only decent outfit I had. I practiced my bowing in front of the mirror, over and over, rehearsing what to say and what smile would be proper. But when I finally came, the mansion gates were shut tight, and my identity was stripped away. My birth mother said I was raised in the countryside, crude and uncultured. But she seemed to forget that it was her precious adopted daughter who stole my place. When the truth finally came out, all she wanted was to erase me. Lost in thought, I didn't notice a graceful figure approaching until she was right beside me. She gently raised a finger to her lips, silencing the maid and the matron who were about to gasp. Then she picked up a phoenix tail hairpin and tucked it into my bun, adjusting it carefully before stepping back to admire her work with a smile. This pin makes Ling'an look even more elegant, she said. I snapped back to reality, nearly jumping to my feet in surprise. Empress Dowager. But she gently pushed me back down. There you go again, calling me the wrong thing. I bit my lip, feeling a bit shy as I whispered. Mother. That's my girl. Her cheerful response made my eyes sting again. I quickly lowered my gaze, unable to look at her eyes so full of love, afraid I'd break down crying right in front of her. But she insisted on cupping my face and dabbing at my tears with a handkerchief. Silly child, why cry? The good days are just beginning. I sniffled, holding back my tears. Mother is right. She nodded in satisfaction and then studied my reflection in the mirror, adjusting a few stray hairs at my temples. Finally, she took my hand and pulled me up. Come, let's go enjoy the feast. My heart warmed as she led me out of the tent. Outside, dusk had settled, painting the entire hunting ground in shades of gold and red. The evening breeze was pleasant, smoke curled up from cooking fires, and small groups of noblewomen chatted together. When they saw the Empress Dowager, they all curtsied in greeting. She waved a hand dismissively, but held my hand tighter as I tried to pull away. No need for formalities, she announced. By now, everyone knows I've adopted a new daughter, and the Emperor has granted her the title Princess Ling'an. As she spoke, all eyes turned to me. Some curious, some appraising, some offering genuine congratulations. I nodded and smiled at each one, careful not to make a misstep. But amid the well wishes, I caught a particularly complicated gaze. I followed it. The Marchioness of Dingbei stood at the edge of the crowd, Su Mingwei in her arms, staring at me intently. Her eyes held resentment, bitterness, and a trace of something I couldn't quite read. A kind of wistfulness. Su Mingwei in her arms looked pale, her eyes red-rimmed, as if she'd been crying. When she noticed me looking, she quickly turned her face away, burying it in the Marchioness's shoulder. The Marchioness instinctively tightened her arms around her, then lifted her gaze to meet mine. For a moment, I thought she might say something. But she didn't. She just slowly lowered her eyes and turned away, carrying Su Mingwei with her. Her retreating figure looked inexplicably forlorn. After gaining the Empress Dowager as my mother and the Emperor as my brother, my days became more peaceful and stable than I'd ever imagined. My mother worried over me constantly, reminding me to dress warmly when it got cold, sending someone to check on me when the wind blew. My brother, busy as he was, often sent fresh fruits and fine silks, afraid his newly found sister might feel neglected. They spoiled me endlessly. Suddenly, I became the darling of the capital, pursued and flattered by everyone. Those who used to avoid me now scrambled to leave their calling cards. Those who never gave me a second glance now claimed we were old friends. At every banquet, the noble young ladies of the capital fought to surround me. The glory that once belonged to Su Mingwei now falls entirely to me. But what makes her even more jealous is how her fiancé treats me differently. The princess is brave, with courage that ordinary noble ladies cannot match. I heard that on the day the Empress Dowager was attacked, the imperial guards were all pulled away, and it was the princess who stayed calm and stepped forward. Gu Qingxi, the heir of the Zhenghua Duke's mansion, admires valor, and his words are full of appreciation for me. I lower my eyes and don't accept the praise. The heir flatters me too much. Gu Qingxi smiles, says no more, and turns to walk away with his companions. He only stopped briefly to exchange a few words with me, but it's enough to make Su Mingwei burn with jealousy. I turn around and meet her face full of envy and resentment. She says, "Sun Yan, you must be feeling pretty pleased with yourself right now, aren't you? You didn't reclaim your status as the legitimate daughter of the Dingbei Marquis' mansion, but you jumped up to become Princess Lingyan, and you've even earned my fiancé's favor. I say calmly, you're overthinking it. After all this time, I've finally realized how narrow-minded I was in my past life. I trapped myself in a cage of petty gains and losses because of a momentary obsession. But fate plays its tricks, and this time, it's Su Mingwei who's left blaming the world. Months later, a palace banquet is held in the imperial garden to celebrate the great victory on the border. The lights are blazing, bright as day. During the feast, the emperor raises his cup and says with a hearty laugh, "This victory is all thanks to the border defense map drawn by Princess Lingyan. It allowed our young soldiers to see the enemy's situation clearly, seize the initiative, and defeat a larger force with a smaller one." As soon as he says this, Shen Zhao gasps involuntarily. How could she have drawn that? His wide eyes are full of shock and disbelief. In his view, I'm just a rough girl raised in the countryside, so there's no way I could have drawn a border defense map. But he seems to have forgotten that in my past life, I was sold to the barbarians by my husband's family. After narrowly escaping, I struggled to survive for years in a desolate land to protect myself. By then, I knew the border terrain, tribal distribution, and even the climate and local products like the back of my hand. At his outburst, the Empress Dowager frowns in displeasure and scolds coldly, "Heir of the Dingbei Marquis, what do you mean by this? Are you implying that the Emperor and I are making things up?" Shen Zhao's face turns crimson, and he stammers, "Your Majesty, that map is clearly..." "How dare you?" The Dingbei Marquis cuts him off sharply, suddenly standing up. He snatches the wine cup from Shen Zhao's hand and splashes it in his face, roaring, "You insolent brat. You've lost all decorum in front of the Emperor and spoken recklessly. Get on your knees and apologize to His Majesty, the Empress Dowager, and the Princess right now." Shen Zhao wipes the cold wine from his face, still unwilling to back down, and tries to argue. But when he looks up and catches the Emperor's mocking smile, he can't help but shiver and snaps back to his senses. He quickly kneels and kowtows in apology, "Your servant. Spoke recklessly after drinking, offended your Majesty, and disrespected the princess. I admit my guilt. Please, your Majesty, the Empress Dowager, and the princess, be magnanimous and forgive me." The Emperor toys with his wine cup and says indifferently, "Rise. I'll let it go this time. But if there's a next time, I won't be so lenient." With that, the Emperor falls silent. Instead, Zhang Dequan, the chief eunuch waiting quietly by his side, steps forward, flicks his horsetail whisk, and announces loudly, "By the Emperor's decree, Princess Lingyan is granted a fief of 1,000 households, 10,000 taels of gold, a bushel of East Sea pearls, 100 bolts of cloud-patterned brocade. Additionally, the Spring Sunshine Manor, on the outskirts of the capital, is granted to the princess as her personal estate." The rewards are so lavish that they leave everyone stunned. The Spring Sunshine Manor was a villa built by the late emperor for his most beloved Princess Xiaoyang. It's famous for its beautiful scenery and hot springs, and it has never been granted to anyone else. For a moment, the banquet falls silent, then a wave of muffled gasps and whispers breaks out. Countless eyes burned into me with intense heat. I rose from my seat, knelt formally, and said, "Your sister thanks your Majesty for his boundless grace." The Emperor personally gestured for me to rise, smiling. "Get up, we're family, no need for such formality." The Empress Dowager also smiled and patted my hand. To some, this scene was especially grating. As I stood, my peripheral vision caught the Dingbei Marquis family seating area. The Dingbei Marchioness kept her head down, her expression unreadable, but her hand clenched a handkerchief tightly. Su Mingwei, meanwhile, was pale as a ghost, staring fixedly at the wine cup on the table before her, her fingertips white from the pressure. The banquet continued under a strangely tense atmosphere. After a few rounds of drinks, the mood loosened up again. A noble lady suggested a game of passing the flower while the drum beat, to liven things up. The drum thumped, and a silk flower whipped through the guests. Suddenly, the drum stopped. The flower landed squarely in my hands. All eyes turned to me once more. In an instant, Su Mingwei jumped up, as excited as a dog spotting a fresh pile of steaming dung, and gloated, with the frontier victory, Princess Ling'an holds a high position and has received generous rewards from His Majesty. Now that she's won the spotlight, shouldn't she grace us with a talent performance to liven things up? The Dingbei Marchioness frowned disapprovingly. Mingwei, Princess Ling'an is of noble status. All the more reason. Su Mingwei cut her off loudly, her eyes blazing at me. After all, isn't our great Liang tradition that the ruler shares joy with the people? Princess Ling'an also came from the common folk. If she forgets her roots and acts all high and mighty, wouldn't that betray the favor of His Majesty and the Empress Dowager, and the expectations of the people? Everyone knew I grew up in the countryside and never learned the arts of qin, chess, calligraphy, or painting. Su Mingwei, fully aware of this, was deliberately putting me on the spot to embarrass me. I frowned slightly, pondering how to respond. Then, out of nowhere, a clear male voice rang out, "Who says a talent performance has to be about qin, chess, calligraphy, painting, or poetry? I've heard the princess grew up among the people, so she must have skills we know nothing about. Why not let us all see one?" Su Mingwei followed the voice. There, in the martial officials section, Gu Qingxi was looking at me with obvious admiration. In that instant, her face turned deathly pale. Regret and jealousy surged through her like a flood. She never imagined that while she'd schemed to trap me, her own fiancé would step in to save me. That hurt her 100 times more than death. Su Mingwei's hands clenched secretly within her sleeves, her gaze turning venomous as it fixed on me. I pretended not to notice, rose with a composed smile, and said, "Then today, Ling'an will make a humble display." I ordered someone to bring a pair of bamboo chopsticks and an empty bowl. The guests murmured, guessing my intentions. Su Mingwei, however, thought I was just putting on an act, and a smug look crept back onto her face. But the next moment, I placed the chopsticks horizontally against my lips and closed my eyes. When I opened them again, my entire demeanor had changed. A low, guttural sound escaped my lips. It was the wind howling across the Gobi, carrying sand and swirling. The chopsticks trembled slightly, and into the wind came the sound of hoofbeats, armor, and horns. The once noisy banquet fell utterly silent. Everyone's eyes widened in disbelief as they stared at me. Using my tongue to click against the roof of my mouth, I made the hoofbeats draw closer. I patted my chest lightly, and the sound of clanking iron rang out. From my throat rolled the mournful wail of a horn, deep and stirring, vibrating in everyone's chest. In my past life, when I'd been stranded at the frontier, I'd befriended an old soldier. He'd been a scout messenger in the army, using vocal mimicry to relay messages and imitate birds and beasts as warnings. During our time together, he taught me this skill. Just as everyone was absorbed in my flawless mouth sound performance, all the vivid and lifelike sounds came to an abrupt halt. In the dead silence, a sigh escaped me, as light as wind passing through an empty tent. Then I opened my mouth and began to sing. In March, willow buds turn yellow, I see my man off to ancient Dunhuang. In June, the days grow long, the borderlands dry and cracked without rain. In September, autumn winds turn cool, and frost falls on the foreign sky by the 8th month. In December, snow fills the heavens, and news of victory returns to Jade Gate Pass. Ask not how many are buried on the battlefield, only say that men have repaid their country, and daughters need not wait year after year. My voice was not loud, rough with the grit of yellow sand and burning with the sting of strong wine. Mother, your son cannot come back. As that last line faded into a breathy whisper, the surroundings fell into absolute stillness. Gu Qingxi was the first to react, applauding me. Princess Lingyan, this song says more than 1,000 words. After that day, my reputation spread far and wide. The title of Princess Lingyan became well-deserved, and no one dared criticize me anymore. Even Dingbei Marquis, who had once ignored me completely, took the initiative to block my path at an arched gate after a court session. I looked up coldly. May I ask what the Marquis wants? Dingbei Marquis said, Sun Yan, in this life, even though you've won the Emperor's favor and become a princess, you still carry the blood of my Shen family. No matter what, that is an indisputable fact. I curled my lips in a mocking smile. So what? The imperial family is fickle, but your family can be your shelter. That was what Dingbei Marquis said. He was hinting that I should use my status as princess to pave the way for him and Shenjiao to gain official positions. I found it hilarious, laughing so hard I swayed, and mocked, Marquis, you've been in officialdom for years and lived 2 lives. How can you still be so naive and ignorant? The imperial family may be fickle, but wasn't what your Dingbei Marquis household did to me in my past life any less cruel? No. You were utterly heartless and cold-blooded. And you talk about family shelter, then tell me, Marquis, when I was abused by my husband's family and sold off to the borderlands in my past life, where were you? Where was this so-called family you speak of? And now you come to talk to me about family shelter. Don't you find that hypocritical? There was resentment, after all. It was impossible not to have any. It was just hidden away by me. Once touched, it burst out like a flood breaking through a dam, pouring out without end. Marquis, please remember that times have changed. I may not have power that reaches the heavens, but with this identity as Princess Lingyan, I am fully capable of uprooting the Dingbei Marquis household. Dingbei Marquis was left speechless by my words, his face turning ashen. His lips quivered for a long time, but in the end, he couldn't utter a single word. I turned and walked away with a composed stride. After a few steps, his deep voice came from behind me. Are you really going to be this ruthless? I didn't stop walking, only said calmly, Marquis, it's not me who is ruthless. It's you. Back at the princess residence, my personal maid Qing Dai came up to me and said softly, Princess, you're back. The Empress Dowager just sent over fresh cherries, saying they're the first batch of this year's tribute, specially saved for you. Looking at the basket of bright, tempting cherries, a warmth filled my heart. Prepare some paper and a brush for me. I want to write a thank you note to Mother. Qing Dai acknowledged and went to fetch them. I sat by the window, picked up the brush to write, but then set it down again. Outside the window, the crabapple blossoms were in full bloom. A gentle breeze blew, and petals fluttered down. Scenes from my past life flashed before my eyes like a revolving lantern. The humiliation of being denied recognition, my birth mother's coldness and harshness, my birth father's indifference, my elder brother's contempt. My husband's family's beatings, the humiliation of being sold off, the hardships of the borderlands. And that plea for help that went unanswered, and those light words, you brought it on yourself. But all of that was left behind in my past life when I was reborn. This life, I am Rui, I am Lingyan, with the Empress Dowager as my mother and the Emperor as my brother. I have my own title, my own mansion, and my own fief. No more begging for scraps, no more pleading for anyone's attention or pity. But the reckoning for the Dingbei Marquis's household was just beginning. The Zhenghua Duke's mansion formally called off the engagement with the Dingbei Marquis's household. The reason was simple: my true identity as the legitimate daughter of the Dingbei Marquis's household had been exposed by someone with ulterior motives. Gu Qingxi left only one message: the Gu family does not form alliances with the heartless and unjust. Su Mingwei went completely mad on the spot. She threw herself before the Dingbei Marquis, the Marchioness, and Shen Zhao, screaming and throwing a fit, all her usual gentleness gone. Why didn't you acknowledge her back then? Why not? If you had claimed her early and raised her properly in the mansion, how could Brother Xiaoyuan have broken off our engagement? Now I've lost everything. Everything. The Marchioness collapsed into her chair, overwhelmed with regret, tears streaming down her face, unable to utter a single word. But the Marquis couldn't stand Su Mingwei's hysterical display. He slapped her hard across the face and roared, "Shut up! How dare you blame us? At the end of the day, we abandoned our own daughter for your sake. We became the heartless ones, and you repay us with resentment and false accusations? Do you have any idea how much we're being sidelined in court now? We're being stabbed in the back every single day, and there are even censors suggesting we lack virtue and shouldn't be trusted." But Su Mingwei, true to her selfish nature, kept screaming, "I don't care. It's all your fault. If I can't marry Brother Xiaoyuan, Sun Yan won't get off easy either." Her words were laced with venom, and her eyes burned with frenzied desperation. The Marchioness snapped her head up, staring at her in disbelief, as if seeing for the first time the daughter she had raised with her own hands. "Mingwei, what did you say?" Su Mingwei spat viciously, "I want her dead." With that, she stumbled and charged out recklessly. The Marquis bellowed, "Stop her." But it was already too late. The next morning, I had just woken up when Qingdai, with a grave expression, informed me, "News from the Dingbei Marquis's household. Yesterday, after being rejected by the Zhenghua Duke's mansion, Su Mingwei lost her mind. She stormed into the ancestral hall, smashed your longevity tablet, and set the hall on fire." I paused mid-motion as I was pulling on my robe. "How bad is the fire?" Luckily, it was discovered in time, only half the hall burned. "But Su Mingwei. She's gone." I was silent for a moment, then nodded in acknowledgement. Qingdai, however, was worried. "Princess, do you think she might try to harm you?" I walked to the window and pushed it open. Morning light filtered in, and the crabapple blossoms in the courtyard had been beaten down by the night rain, leaving scattered red petals. "If she dares to come, she'll be walking right into a trap. And that trap, I had set it long ago." 3 days later, I took a carriage to Hugua Temple to burn incense and pray for the Empress Dowager and the Emperor. Halfway there, an arrow suddenly shot out from the dense forest by the roadside. It struck the carriage window frame, its fletching vibrating with a low hum. Someone shouted, "Assassins! Protect the princess!" Before the words faded, dozens of black-clad figures burst from the woods, blades flashing, charging straight for the carriage. The Imperial Guards quickly formed ranks to meet them. I lifted a corner of the carriage curtain, watching the chaos outside with cold eyes. These black-clad men were well-trained, but they weren't military, their moves carried the roughness of bandits. Amid the confusion, Su Mingwei, clutching a dagger, lunged straight for me with murderous intent. "Sun Yan. I'm going to kill you." At that moment, the Imperial Guards and the assassins seemed to have made a pact, spontaneously clearing a wide path for Su Mingwei to assassinate me. But just as she was about to reach me, one of the black-clad men used the flat of his blade to knock the dagger from her hand with a sharp clang. Su Mingwei cried out in pain and was immediately subdued by the guards, pinned to the ground. In the next instant, both sides stopped fighting. I slowly stepped down from the carriage, supported by Qing Dai. You. She widened her eyes, realization dawning too late. Sun Yan, you tricked me. I smiled slightly. If you hadn't truly intended to kill me, how could you have taken the bait? I leaned forward a little, looking down at her from above, and said, attempting to assassinate a princess, what crime is that, I wonder? So hard to guess. In the end, Su Mingwei was thrown into prison. The moment the news got out, the Dingbei Marchioness knelt outside the princess's residence, begging for mercy for her beloved daughter. Qing Dai asked me, Princess, will you go see her? I went. In just a few short days, the Dingbei Marchioness had aged considerably. Gray hairs had sprouted at her temples, and dark circles hung heavy under her eyes. She no longer resembled the noble lady who had once sat high in the hall, looking at me with disgust and calling me vulgar and uncouth. As soon as she entered, she dropped straight to her knees. Princess, I beg you. Please, for the sake of blood ties. I cut her off. Madam, do you even deserve to speak of blood ties? She trembled all over, tears streaming down her face. I know I've wronged you. But Mingwei is innocent. She knew nothing. She just loved young Master Gu too much. Innocent? I laughed mockingly. I admit that in my past life, I owed her. I was consumed by jealousy and hatred, and I caused her untimely death. So you all hated me, ignored me, and left me to die. I accept all of that. But in this life, have I harmed her in any way? I never exposed her identity. I never drove her out of the mansion. I never laid a finger on her. It was she who kept pushing, she who was consumed by envy, she who, I paused, then said each word deliberately, brought this upon herself. Those 4 words hit the Dingbei Marchioness like a sledgehammer. She collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. I stood up and turned my back to her. Qing Dai, see her out. Su Mingwei's trial was swift. With both witnesses and physical evidence, she had no room to deny anything. The Ministry of Justice sentenced her to execution. After the execution, the Dingbei Marquis's household collected her remains and buried them hastily. It was said that the Dingbei Marchioness held Su Mingwei's memorial tablet and cried all night, and by the next morning, she never woke again. The imperial physician said it was a stroke brought on by intense anger, leaving her paralyzed and bedridden for the rest of her days. The Dingbei Marquis submitted his resignation, and the emperor approved it. Shen Zhao was stripped of his office and became a commoner. The once mighty Dingbei Marquis's household had fallen. When the news reached me, I was accompanying the Empress Dowager in the imperial garden, admiring the chrysanthemums. I was briefly stunned, but then I felt nothing more and continued chatting and laughing with her. All the grudges and debts of past and present lives were, at last, completely settled. As for me now, I couldn't be more content. The end, the end.